Hello, and welcome to the Television Spotlight on the Comic Book Page podcast. My name is John Mayo. In this episode, we'll be having a spoiler-filled discussion about a television show that we think you'll enjoy. In this episode, I am joined by my sister Kay, and we're going to have a spoiler-filled discussion on the first season of Debris. Now, this was an NBC show.
Yes.
13 episodes for the first season.
Mm-hmm. Filmed in, I believe, the Vancouver vicinity.
I think that's what we discovered, yeah. The basic premise is there's an alien spacecraft of some unknown origin or whatever that 6 months ago crashed or something, and there's been debris peppering the Earth.
It was severely damaged in space and is kind of breaking up in our atmosphere, is the impression I've gotten.
I couldn't tell if it was breaking up in the atmosphere because it's not like they've sent anything up to go get the remains of it. It was never entirely clear to me what happened to the ship or...
We're not the ones who damaged it. We're not the ones responsible for it falling. We're just collecting the debris that lands.
I'm not even positive about that we're not responsible humans.
We have not stated or claimed responsibility.
There's no reason to think we are responsible, but there's no reason to think we're not either. The whole thing is around this debris has hit Earth, and when it lands, it's kind of like the first season of Smallville, where you had all the kryptonite freaks and stuff. Except here, the debris is technology, and it's causing oddities.
Mm-hmm.
Anti-gravity, or allowing, teleportation, or portals from one place to another, or anything. I mean, some of the stuff seems like it has a legit use for space travel. Some of it, not so much.
Some of it's fascinating in terms of, like, a lot of science fiction uses the concept of some form of cryopods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so this had kind of the concept of, okay, everybody we want in the equivalent of cryopod, you go stand in this room, we'll hit the button, and everybody within whatever the block radius is.
Stasis of some sort, yeah.
Right? So you take that technology, and then a couple episodes later, you pair it with the technology that is everybody who touches this piece of debris reverts in age, if you will, and goes back to, it was like age 21. Now pair those two together, and you have a crew that almost doesn't age on what in other science fiction would be a generational ship.
Well, and there was another one where it was cloning people.
Yes.
So you've got the ability to augment your manpower on the ship however you need to. I'm trying to think if there was one that did healing or not, but there's some stuff that, like I said, had a legit use for like a generational type space travel across the stars or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen zero evidence of any kind of alien life, which is a little weird in of itself, or anything like controls or anything to give any kind of indication of what kind of life it might be.
I'm not sure we've seen much in the way of weapons. We've seen things we've tried to weaponize, but I don't know that we've seen things that the moment we found the debris it was, aha, that's their weapon.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because some of the stuff, like the suspended animation and cloning, seems relevant to biological life.
Definitely.
But we've seen no evidence of alien biological life. We've seen evidence of glowing spherical thing that may or may not have sentience. I mean, there is a sentience beyond the debris, but there's the possibility that the ship itself was sentient.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was an exploratory vessel of some sort, possibly AI, possibly not artificial, but I don't say mechanical life, but you know what I mean.
There was some debris that was kind of, sort of terraforming, if you will, converting the environment, but simultaneously, it was converting the people within the environment to live within the new environment.
Yeah. Again, generational ship trying to find something, a new home.
Mm-hmm.
Which could beg the question of, was it the precursor ship?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, that's the premise, I guess. But the show is focusing around two people who are agents, one for the US government, one for the UK government, that are paired together to go investigate this debris and go solve whatever's going on with it. And kind of collect it all up.
Well, and there's I almost want to say this internal struggle of they're collecting the debris and then sort of a what's being done with it. Is it being cataloged? Is it being studied? At one point, there's this warehouse where it looks like they're almost using it like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yes, it definitely... I was thinking more of kind of the airplane wreckage where they're putting the plane back together to see what happened.
Yeah.
But they seem to be trying to rebuild the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how they're able to do that, I don't know. At other times, it's like, well, the ship seems to be trying to rebuild itself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the debris of the week.
Yes.
There's the relationship between the two agents that we're following and such. There's the relationship with each agent and their organization. And then, of course, there's this third-party organization that's trying to, free the debris for the good of mankind or what have you.
It's very much an organization that doesn't trust governments or government interests.
Mm-hmm.
And their attitude is no matter what we've seen of these agents, who may or may not have the same goals as the government at large, which I think is actually a fair statement when you think about it. Does the peon versus the commander-in-chief have the same intent?
Even if the government's looking out for the good of the people, it doesn't mean it's looking out for the good of the individual person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely aspects where what this influx group is trying to do of almost democratizing the debris or whatever is very much against what's good for society at whole, because, again, some people are going to abuse this kind of stuff.
Well, Influx has a bartering system.
Mm-hmm.
Debris is being traded on the black market all over the place, and Influx doesn't seem to care what's being done with the debris, so long as it's not purposely going into government hands for government purposes, which means a government person can be in on the bartering if they believe they're not bartering on behalf of the government.
Well, in Maddox, the U.S. handler, or the handler for the U.S. agent, definitely seems to be accumulating debris to help his kid, which has been, injured.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in this show, sometimes a little too much.
Well, I'd say it was the first 6 or 7 shows at least, where at the end of each episode I'm like, and I think they had the premise of a spinoff in there.
Yes, they definitely had quite a few where, had they decided to have a bigger picture look at this, they could have had subplots of keeping tabs on what happened to these people out of this incident or that incident. Even if it was just a couple of lines of dialogue, we didn't necessarily have to see those people again.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it would have been fascinating for a show, and I don't think a network sci-fi show was the place to do this, but I think somewhere where it's on a streaming service and you've got a longer lifespan, to take that longer view of it and have things that are done in the first couple of episodes really build up and play out over the course of multiple seasons, not in major ways, not like that's the linchpin of everything, but again, oh yeah, this guy we run into, 6 seasons in, we've kind of been keeping tabs on him the whole time, so when we see him again, it may take us a minute to place it, but oh yeah, we have heard about all these things he's gone through.
Yeah.
Kind of like how in Stargate SG-1, they knew they had a 2-year runway to begin with, and that allowed them to build up some story arcs and stuff like that, and some of those characters and situations played out over the course of multiple seasons after that. Here, with 13 episodes, there's stuff that's brought up and just kind of never mentioned again, because it's the debris of the week kind of thing.
Well, when we sat down to watch the final episode, and it was kind of I hope they deal with this, I hope they deal with that, I hope they deal with the other thing. You mentioned Brian Beneventi's injections.
Yeah, he's the U.S. agent who'd been getting these mysterious injections over the course of the season. It's like, what's that all about?
I mean, they really slow played it early on. And then 3 or 4 episodes ago, it was, we got double his dosage. But even then, they weren't really saying why or what it was for.
I took it as they had established it and they'd kept it in play, but they'd never really progressed it. And they touched on it a bit when the debris seemed to be trying to communicate with Brian.
Mm-hmm.
But that was more, okay, now we're starting to do something with it. So when we got to this final episode of the season, and I don't know when we're recording this, it's not been announced if they're getting a second season. So conceivably, that was the end of the series. Hopefully not. Maybe it'll pick up on NBC or go to Peacock or who knows. But when we started watching this episode, it's like, yeah, they've got to touch on that, but I knew they didn't have the time to really resolve that or give a satisfactory...
They did better than I expected.
I don't know, it felt like they played it up and then used that as an excuse of kind of get out of jail free on their plot situation of, okay, this is going to happen, it's going to have these bad impacts, and oh, he's immune magically because.
Not totally immune. Didn't have the same effect as other people.
Survived it, though.
Yes. But it was definitely he's been taking this to deal with effects from the debris, and they gave a reason why he'd been taking the injections. I wasn't sure we were ever going to find out why he's been taking the injections.
Yeah, but we got a line or two of dialogue if he'd been in some sort of incident in the past.
Mm-hmm.
With a few other people, one or two of which we've met. One of which of the two. Now, if they had actually flashed back to that and given us a little... I mean, there's an episode to be had around that reveal.
I totally agree, and I think they owe that to us next season.
Yeah, they owe us that. How was the thing developed? They've already played the card, and now they've kind of got to justify that.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt there was one or two other places where they kind of did that. Setting up the dad, he's dead, he's back, all those kinds of things. And it's, yeah, he got better with a line or two of dialogue and not a, how did they know that was going to work? They get a little at the end of, well, he kind of knew that was going to happen, maybe, sort of, maybe not. This kind of a show is challenging to do because you can't give everything all at once. But if you slow play the stuff and it takes too long, it's easy for the audience, at least me, to get impatient and feel it's not really progressing.
They seem to have some people who are mysteriously well informed about the debris.
Yeah, and I'd be okay with that if we had had an episode, which we didn't, but if we'd had one that they spend it trying to, it's like, we've got a piece of debris, it doesn't seem to be doing anything, and use that to do, I don't say a clip show, but something where we see footage of, fragments of a ton of different investigations.
I'd actually like an episode next season called First Contact to be from 20 or 30 years ago and have a younger Maddox, a younger George, and a younger one of Finola's handler, among other people.
We haven't seen in half the season, it seems like.
But just have some of these people who seem to have made a point of being involved, who seem to have an awful lot of information, and whether it was this mysterious first contact from before also being debris incidents that didn't hit the news, because 20 years ago things like this were kept under wraps before the internet, etc., or whatever it was, but kind of revealed this isn't first contact with this species, this debris. This is a second whatever it is, and that's why they know what they know.
Well, what I would almost do in place of that is, obviously this ship came to Earth for some reason. Could be just chance. But what if it was in response to one of the things we'd sent out into space back in the 60s or 70s or whatever? And if they could find a way to do, and it'd be hard at this point, it may be a few seasons down before they could do this, but from the alien perspective, their debris situation.
Yes.
Where one of our early things crashes onto their planet, they've had to deal with this, and they kind of, oh, well, there's intelligent life out there. Well, not very intelligent, but they threw a rock into space, let's go visit. And realize, oh, it'll take, The trick is how to do it where it takes them generations, yet it's only been a few decades for us. And again, you've got sci-fi to play with, so there's a number of ways you could do that. Of it may still be a generational ship for them, and maybe they've got a shorter lifespan, or there's a way that even though it takes them hundreds of perceived years, they can kind of collapse time and space such that while they've spent the time, it's gotten to us faster than it felt for them.
Yeah.
Which would explain the cloning. It would explain some of these other things.
The one piece of debris that I felt was inconsistent with the ship and with the logic of the ship was from the two-parter with the siblings.
Where they were kind of jumping between realities?
Where the piloting was based on effectively wish fulfillment, hidden desires.
Yeah.
I mean, think of all the ways your navigation could go wrong if you're dependent on your pilot being in a good mood and really wanting to go where the captain wants him to go.
Or if you're from a race that doesn't have emotions. Imagine a Vulcan piloting that kind of ship. They wouldn't have any problem with it. Who would? Oh, put one of these, emotional humans. Of course it's going to go haywire.
But you still have to have a Vulcan who thinks that the captain has set the logical course.
There's a couple of ways you could handle that. And to me, it implies inherent differences on the aliens. And that's one of the few signs where you're right. We actually got some semblance of there was a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems unlikely that that piece of debris was like the command center for the whole thing. Because somehow it not only crashed to Earth, but got into
a harbor
or a bay or whatever, and seemed to be almost tucked underneath it. And how it crashed into there without,
Well, it kind of crashed sideways. It was a cylindrical piece that they swam into.
Yeah, but it seemed like they had to swim and go out and under or whatever. It just, how could it have crashed in there without anyone have noticing?
Oh, I feel that way about most of the debris. They've found some sizable chunks.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly most of the world sleeps deeply.
Well, I think the mistake they made was not having, I don't want to say constant meteor showers, but that most of it was burning up in the atmosphere and they were looking for the pieces that didn't.
Well, and once they found the little girl who the debris gravitated to, they didn't start looking for an adult who had the equivalent ability to help them get the debris when they were out hunting it.
Yeah. There were a couple of times where there was some follow-on stuff to be had. I do think that two-parter, though, you referenced, was probably one of the best stories they did.
One of the best I think we've seen in quite a while, in part because they could see the points where reality was fracturing. They could see to the alternate realities.
Visually, they did some cool stuff there, and story-wise, because at this point, they're driving out to where the debris is. They pull off to go scan, because they've got a magic device to go check their
Ligari levels.
They have Ligari levels, the alien radiation that nobody seems to notice, but they can detect. How they built such a device, don't know, because it's only been 6 months, but still. But they pull off on kind of the side of the road where they're overlooking this bay, this harbor, whatever it is. And they cut back to that multiple times because inexplicably when these two kids, or one of them would pilot from reality to reality, we would replay that day. They would replay that day.
But they were jumping back 2 days, and we only got to replay one of them for some reason.
Yeah, they were jumping back 2 days, and so it's not like they were going to the neighboring reality in real time. Yet they could see it in real time, and they could communicate in real time, but when they jumped, they'd had to go back, so confusing.
That gave them time to kind of live in parody, if you will.
It certainly allowed for, well, actually, that they didn't go back the full 2 days, because when Brian jumped, and he was in the SUV as they were about to pull in to the place.
Well, that's where TV came back to. But when you asked the kids, they always said we jump back 2 days every time.
Well, that's what the kids said, but you saw his reaction like he was just waking up in the car. There's a few minor inconsistencies, but cutting to that same scene where they pull off on the side and it's different agents or slightly different play out or whatever was well done.
Yeah, I think we went through 7 or 8 partners at least.
At least. They had to spend a while on that one shot, just doing it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And then when we get to the second of the two parters, and we now get Finola, the other agent's kind of viewpoint on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then how it all kind of blends together. I mean, it was well done. I mean, I don't recall seeing another sci-fi show kind of take that basic, almost Groundhog Day premise in that parallel reality mode and do it so well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've seen a few Groundhog Days. Again, SG-1 for Stargate did a brilliant one. But this show, I think, did well on the general sci-fi aspects, the kind of science procedural aspects, the characterizations and interplay of the two agents, of their organizations, generally worked well. There were a couple of times, like the British side of things. Once Dad got into the loop, we didn't really see much of Fenola's sister or handler really ever again. There was a little overlap, but not by much.
Yeah, I would agree.
So that seemed like a plotline that was dropped. Maddox and his divorce, the problem I have with that is he's a supporting cast member, so do we need that much time spent on him? And do we really need to do that when our main agents are jumping between realities?
That was all to drive home how hard the kid's disability was on the marriage. I think that was to give weight to the significance of using the debris to help the kid to save the marriage.
And I understand that. I just felt setting so much of that up when it felt like we were on another reality.
Yeah.
Undercut it.
Mm-hmm.
If it had taken place during almost any other episode, I'd have been okay with that.
Yeah.
Overall, I enjoy the show.
When I first saw a commercial for it, I remember I sent you a link to it, and I told you I wanted to watch it, and then I told you based on, because it was a short commercial, so based on the commercial, I think it's sci-fi, but I think it's procedural. And I really don't know how much of which we're going to get. We got more sci-fi than I expected.
We did, and it's very much a procedural along the lines of a medical mystery kind of a show.
Mm-hmm.
Except instead of it being an actual medical mystery, it's sci-fi debris, quote-unquote ailment.
But, I mean, it's very grounded in basically modern reality. I mean, they didn't bother with COVID or any of that.
No.
But it's generically now.
But it's not like they've got super science, the Ligari scanners or whatever. It's like, okay, you've had 6 months, you've studied this, you're going to have something.
Mm-hmm.
I always found it hilarious when they don these hazmat suits to get near this debris, and I'm like, how is that going to help again?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think this is an airborne thing that's possessing people from miles away and getting them here, or, causing, a maid at a hotel to drop through, 40 stories or whatever of the building.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple of those things that were a little humorous.
Yeah, definitely.
And I told you this at one point. I thought it'd be funny if they had, in addition to these two field agents, a room full of really smart guys who wanted to be absolutely nowhere near this debris because it's so damn dangerous and unpredictable. Fascinating as hell to study from afar.
Yeah.
But imagine if you had almost like the cast of The Big Bang Theory as your think tank somewhere else.
We'll zoom it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And kind of freaking out when it does weird things or whatever. And you've got the agents. It's like, I'm standing right here with it. Give me some guidance.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So I think there's some fun that could be had there. But alas, they didn't go that way.
I thought they balanced the sci-fi with the procedural really well, though.
I think so. I think they were working through the problem solving and stuff like that. And because they weren't reliant on experts for the most part, it felt a bit more believable.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, I'm seeing it do this, so let's try this sort of, problem solving. And it's a fun show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that the first few episodes had an opening that kind of explained the premise. I think they dropped that too quick.
Yeah.
I think a sci-fi show on network television is a hard sell.
I would agree with that.
Particularly one where you've got to understand the premise to understand the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's enough of a serial arc here.
Definitely.
That I think it's a little harder for somebody to get into a little later in the game. But, I look back on other sci-fi shows NBC in particular has done. I mean, go all the way back to Quantum Leap. It started with, he's putting right what once went wrong, the whole voiceover, only, he can see Al and all, the whole thing. To where if you're coming in cold and you pay attention to that, I get the premise. Okay, let's go with it.
Yeah.
And there were some episodes that built on things, but it was very episodic.
Mm-hmm.
And just two characters and whatever the theme of the week was. Here, there's a lot more at play, and I think it would be easy for people who are casual viewers and caught just a couple episodes to get confused by who's Maddox, what's going on with Influx, and all of these things.
Yeah.
Why aren't they telling their handler stuff? Why are they telling it? What happened to the plane they were always in and now never see?
What's with George?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I almost feel they were a little more ambitious than they had the space to tell in 13 episodes.
Yeah.
But I respect the ambition.
Yeah, But that makes me wonder kind of how COVID affected them in terms of filming, in terms of were they meant to be a fall premiere and got pushed to mid-season because of COVID and filming issues. If they had been a fall premiere, they would have done 13 episodes with hope of getting picked up for a back 9.
Mm-hmm.
But if they got pushed to mid-season, there was no hope of a back 9.
Yeah, I am curious what the game plan was, because I think they needed a little more time and space to play out. This felt more like a mid-season hiatus break than end of season.
It never felt 100% like an American show, and I'm not quite sure how to describe that. But
Well, I'll tell you why it didn't feel that way to me.
Okay.
I would be hard-pressed to name any of the regular actors on this that I think I had ever seen in anything.
The guy who plays Brian Beneventi is apparently well known for, I don't know if it's Game of Thrones or what, but something.
Okay.
That's one of those big name that I just haven't watched shows.
But I mean, how many shows where there's somebody we recognize?
Yeah, I was recognizing more of the guest stars that were coming in for, I wouldn't even say high-level guest star roles, but like the expert of the week for the tech doctor type.
Well, one of the other agents in the reality jumping one we recognized but couldn't place.
From Take Two.
From Take Two. But I would have to go through, the cast listing in IMDb to figure out how many of these names, should I have recognized?
2 or 3 of the guest stars were ones I normally see in Hallmark movies,
Mhm.
like headlining the Hallmark movies, and here they were as just the one of a dozen guest stars. You could have not even noticed them in the opening credits. They held back the name of their big guest star in the final episode till the end.
Yeah.
And he was a big name.
No, he was a name I recognized once I saw it there at the end and stuff, and was trying to, it's like, where do I know him from as we were watching it? But out of 13 episodes in a standard American show of this ilk, we would have recognized one of the support techs or agents or handlers or somebody.
Yeah, but this goes back to during COVID, Canada has requested, whenever possible, hire Canadian actors for roles they're not in the opening credits unless they're recurring.
Understood, but the other part that surprised me is how many shows have we watched that are Canadian shows?
Mm-hmm.
Everything from Flashpoint to the various, Arrowverse shows that film up there, to the Stargate ones, to other actual Canadian shows we've watched.
I agree. And this is why I looked up where it was filming.
Yeah.
Between that and the fact that, we had, I won't say crop circles in a Nebraska cornfield, but almost that type of scenes. And I'm like, where are they filming this to get the prairie land and so many different...
Yeah, they covered their bases pretty well in terms of it feels like we're in a lot of different locales and stuff like that. And without being familiar footage or familiar places.
Yeah.
Which, again, so many shows that we've watched here in the States are filmed up in various parts of Canada that, that's a credit to their location scouts, if nothing else.
Definitely.
And to their casting to find some unfamiliar faces.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are a ton of shows we've watched where the minute we see a name and a credit, particularly if it's a whodunit, that's who did it.
Yeah.
So that to me is a lot of what gave it that, I don't say that foreign film feel or whatever. It didn't feel like it was off in Europe or something like that. And we've seen a few shows that filmed over there, but it felt different than...
It was pulling from a different casting pool than I'm used to seeing.
Yeah.
And that was part of, by about the 3rd episode, between the different casting pool and the, where are they finding these locations? This doesn't look like, it looks like the scenery they say it is. They say it's Nebraska. It has the cornfield look. They say it's Oregon. It has the oceanfront look. They're nailing the scenery, but it doesn't quite feel like America. Where are they filming?
Yeah.
And it was British Columbia, basic Vancouver area. So I was very impressed.
Well, and I think they picked a good place for their filming because, again, they found places that fit where they said it was at.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've seen a couple where it's like, they say this is, somewhere in Europe, but, those are the mountains in Southern California.
Yeah.
Or something of that ilk. I'm hopeful it gets a second season.
Me too.
The guy behind this had also written, or had been behind Almost Human, which we watched a few seasons back. And I think this was a well-conceived idea. Again, I think they needed a little bit more space to kind of let it play out.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly felt it ended on an unsatisfying moment.
Yeah.
Actually, it ended on a perplexing moment.
Yes. Well, it ended on a moment that they were hoping people would ponder throughout, the summer break. And I've got a few theories on it based on things George said, etc. And we had people, I think as far back as the cloning episode, which was fairly early on, talking about the glowing ball.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where the glowing ball is. So they definitely were leading up to this.
No, I think they were, but it didn't have that feel where it was so jaw-dropping that you couldn't not talk about it at the water cooler at work the next day, back when that was a thing.
Yeah.
And the way they had kind of led up to it, they'd had a scene before, it's like, oh yeah, I guess I remember that guy. Kind of, sort of. I remember he was in it, but what did he do again?
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, to me, is it almost would have played better if back at the quarry, Finola had lost her memory.
Yeah.
If she had come out of that like the other 40 or 50 people who had their memories wiped, if she'd been one of the people with her memory wiped, and George had been unconcerned.
Yeah.
The end would have, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, but George wasn't there. The ball of light was there. I mean, there's
but it was
so
an influx thing.
Yeah. There's just so many things going on. It's hard to keep all the threads straight.
And so far, I mean, we think George is on the side of influx as of this episode. But really, it's been hard to know whose side George is on.
I was starting to think he was leading influx up until that last scene.
I've never thought he was leading influx, especially with the big guest star coming across as the leader of influx that nobody wants to cross, even when they think, you really shouldn't have done that at the gas station.
I was starting to think at the end that the guy in that start of that last scene was who was the leader.
Interesting.
Because of how that scene played out. Not that there was any reason to think any of that before that scene.
Yeah.
So I would have liked, and this is again 13 episodes. We're at an odd point in filming of TV shows. I don't know what their original plan was, but I think if we'd had an episode where there was a little bit more of them kind of circling the wagons of, okay, what do we know at this point? What do we think's going on? Do we have a theory on the bigger picture?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the downtime between sightings of new debris or whatever. Why is it still following? Why are we still discovering it now? How come we haven't found it all yet?
Yeah.
You would think if there was stuff raining down from the sky that they'd have been able to track it, unless there was too much, in which point, why don't they go back to that night and what can they rule out,
I almost want to see season 2 start with some really low quality infomercial of this is your home debris kit. Did you find some in the backyard and you don't want to let the government have it? Here's how to safely capture it, collect it, and hold it to sell when you're ready.
What I would do is I would start on that kind of a thing, and now you see somebody clicking to the next channel, and it's the magnet therapy kind of a thing, but with debris.
Yes.
Click to the next channel. You've got the newscast of this is what happened down the street. They think it's a debris thing, and click.
Oh, don't forget to click to the channel that has the lawyer's commercial.
Mm-hmm. Have you been struck by debris? Call so-and-so.
Yes.
I think just by clicking the channels, you could really get a sense of, how it's gone. And then you pull back and it's the agents in their hotel room as they're about to go for the next thing or something.
Yeah.
Or it's influx, whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fun possibilities with the show. And I think they've got enough of a sense of humor about it that they could do those kinds of things. Yet they're not doing a parody of it. And they're also not too full of themselves. And I think a good modern day sci-fi procedural like this is tough to pull off because you want to have that super science and stuff, but you need people with modern science trying to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I thought they balanced that pretty well.
They did.
So, enjoyable show. Curious if it gets picked up. Not expecting, in my opinion, that it'll be back on NBC. Maybe it'll be picked up by Peacock or some other streaming service. And I think a streaming service might be the right place for it.
Well, and I think, honestly, a streaming service gives it options in terms of, on a streaming service, you can do a one-off of, it doesn't have to be 42 minutes, where you explore one of those options that felt like a spinoff in the making.
Well, having the variable length episode would give them a bit more leeway in a few things of, this isn't quite long enough for a 42-minute show. Okay, do 35.
Yeah.
This one, make it seem like it's going to be 42 minutes, then go for another 10.
Yeah.
You know, you can do some pacing things that'd be a lot of fun. And I think we watched this pretty much as it was coming out. Because it was good enough, it was easy to stay up with. But I think if we'd marathoned it a bit more in shorter succession or whatever, I'm curious if our feelings on it would be different.
I think if we'd marathoned it, I'd be clearer on all the spin-off options I saw early on, because they were early on.
I think I'd have a better sense of the thread for the various factions and stuff like that. I think I'd have been able to have it a bit more cohesive in my mind.
Yeah. Because, like, I remember the episode where the missing people came back.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have, like, this box, 2D box in the field.
Yeah.
And it gets bigger and it gets bigger, and then they point the debris at, they get what they're hoping will be one person out, and suddenly they've got more like, it looks like 50.
Yeah.
People.
Well, it's the 4400, or was it The Event? Or there are a couple of shows where they've done these people vanished and came back. But then there was also the people they put in suspended animation for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen with them? There's a number of things that had that kind of longer term investigation potential. And even if they just had like a caseworker or somebody that was, I'll follow up on it, and they just check in periodically or something like that.
Yeah.
So I just don't know that this show, even if it goes to a streaming service, is going to last long enough for that to have had the payoff I would have liked.
Only time will tell.
Yeah. So, fun stuff. Glad we watched it.
Me too.
Anything else?
I think that does it.
Cool.
The show notes and forum for this podcast can be found at www.comicbookpage.com under the podcast and forum sections of the website. Please email us at theguys@comicbookpage.com and let us know what you think of what was discussed in this episode. Thanks for listening.